Good morning, everyone. It is the wonderful career development workshops that we've been hosting on every Tuesday morning. Welcome, Tevita. It's good to have you on board. And we have a video recording today, which is good because I think effective communication workshops are best held when we're able to see facial expressions. So it's fantastic to have you on board. I have So before we commence today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we are virtually meeting, the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and pay my respect to past, present, and emerging leaders of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. So thank you, Tevita, for the student engagement team to be putting down these workshops as a part of career development. So before I commence, I just wanted to ask you to, Tevita is the General Manager for Student Engagement. And why is these career development workshops important from a student engagement perspective? And why have you hosted these workshops?
Great. Yeah, thanks, Rachna. And it's great to be here and always a pleasure to be engaging with our postgraduate cohorts online, although I do miss the face-to-face and fingers crossed. But like for us, these types of webinars link in with two of our strategic themes. So for GSA, we have a strategic plan, and two of them are transitioning to work, so supporting postgraduates into transitioning out of academia into work. And so a lot of these skills that we talk about that we've showcased over the last month is about moving out of the academic life into, obtaining work or giving you the greater opportunity to find work. Now, and the other stream that we want to promote with these sort of webinars is academic excellence. So providing tools for students to do the best that they can with their studies, and hopefully that leads to the bigger and better things for them. So yeah, the two streams for us is really important. That's why we're putting these out to our students.
Oh, that's fantastic. And, so today's workshop is really about effective communication training. And when we were putting this workshop together, what we thought is we want to make it relevant about giving you examples of how these skills can be used at a workplace, your prospective workplace, or where you're currently working in your role, or, when in a role that you're aspiring for, but also can be used for presenting your thesis or participating in interviews. So the examples will be quite relevant to that. And while we were preparing this, we thought we will try and ensure that we give you relevant examples. And I'd like to welcome all the attendees. I believe we have quite a lot of people attending today, Tevita, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it's probably one of the most popular sessions that have been registered for on record at the moment. So we're really excited to have everyone on board.
Fantastic. And also feel free at any point of time to send us any questions on the chat or the Q&A. And Andrew Lee, who's supporting us in the broadcast, will be able to ensure that he draws Tevita's and my attention to these questions so that we can answer them. So I thought the question that we ask ourselves is, why do we actually communicate? And when we communicate, we so focus on the words, okay? We are talking about, my God, this person has learned this new language and has got so many words that they've learned. But research has actually shown that communication is not only about words, but it's actually about tone and the body language. And when we talk about body language and tone and words, you see how they are quite an integrated aspect of your communication. And it's also impacted by your personality, it's impacted by the cultural influence, it's impacted about the number of languages that you know. So I thought that while we're talking about communication, it's just not only the words that you use or the language that you use, it's also about the tone of voice and body language. Is that your also experience, Tevita, about when you listen to someone, you're just not listening to their words, but you're also thinking about their tone and body language? What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, absolutely. I think, I guess that's one of the reasons I miss the face-to-face interaction is you can actually get a lot more from just being in the same room as someone. And the video helps, but it's not the same. I think the tone you said before is extremely important because you can get a clear understanding about, because even in the English language itself, for some of us who speak a few languages, some words need tone to be able to understand the definition. I mean, the word alone can mean a few different things, and without tone, it's hard to know what they mean. So absolutely.
Fantastic. And I think trying to get you a setting of the place, I think Tevita and I found a background of our 188 buildings, the front of our 88 building, as well as the beautiful courtyard. So hopefully we can virtually get you there. So talking about communication, I think research has shown that when you are talking about communication, if you look at a piece of work, 7 sentences or a piece of communication, 7% of it is actually only about words, and 38% is really about the tone, and actually 55% of is your non-verbal communication and body language. It's about the way you stand and deliver your, if you're talking to someone, I don't know, I've noticed that when you stand over someone and stand and talk to them, giving them direction, it sometimes sounds very threatening compared to sitting down at a desk and saying, hey, sit down, I'd like to give you some feedback on your work, and having it at a level that you can talk to one another. I find that more comforting to talk to that person, and also receiving feedback. I've been in jobs where you walk into somebody's office and they're sitting there and they give you a piece of paper and say, hey, I just want to give you feedback about your work that you've done. And when they're sitting and I'm standing and they're kind of, using a tone and a body language which is quite threatening, even the kindest words that they're trying to say to me in that feedback doesn't seem to be well received by me. And what are your experience as a manager? Like if you are, let's say a staff comes to you, Tevita, and is trying to give you some, trying to make you understand and say, hey, I'm not able to do this piece of work because I've got family issues. Normally, what would be your practice if somebody wants to come and raise a concern? What is the kind of balance you use in relation to words, sound, and your body language?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, especially in a work setting, I think the first thing that comes to mind is just showing a bit of respect. So allowing them to talk and explain themselves, but actively listen to what they're saying and understand. But also, you have to be the manager and you have to understand where the situation falls in an organization. But you want, essentially as a manager, you want your staff members to be honest with you and to be able to feel comfortable to come and talk to you about certain things. Otherwise, that you all lose the common goal at the end. And so I think the tone is really important. Just to understand it's a calm tone. It's factual, but there's some understanding in that tone, and just almost come back to them about, okay, so what you're saying is this, and just to get a common understanding, because in my experience, you get a lot more out of being a manager who can understand the core root of certain things, whether they can't finish work or they're struggling with some of the things. And it might just be with resourcing or family issues or just timelines.
Yeah, so I think the nonverbal communication is very important. If people are upset or they're crying or, thing is to acknowledge that, to be able to be empathetic about that, that's very important. So let's just move on to actually, when we talk about nonverbal communication, it's actually, trying to pick up from people's facial language, like you were saying, Tevita, what are they trying to say to me? And maintaining eye contact with that person and looking at their gestures, looking at their body posture and being able to understand. And it's the same when you're going for an interview. I think the most important person I've found enjoying interviewing candidates who actually look at you and talk to you. And I don't feel at all I feel quite comfortable when people use their hands to explain. I know some people kind of consider that, very influenced by your culture, but be comfortable with your culture, be comfortable with how you've learned to communicate. And also, if you're sitting on a chair and you slouch and you fold your hands, and, that may be good in a casual conversation, but if you're in an interview, ensure that you feel that you are keeping your body up, straight, and delivering what you have to say, looking at people and looking at their eyes, and being able to give, the amount of information that you want at an interview. But however, if you're dealing with people who may have certain issues, or may have mental health issues, or may be diagnosed with different personalities, always don't expect the same thing from everyone. Be able to accept people who may put their head down and be a bit shy and may talk to you, may people who may feel a bit uncomfortable and be threatened by having eye contact with you. In some cultures, it's not possible sometimes to be in a way where you are keeping that safe distance. So body language is very, very important. And body language, actually, if you look, because it's in the 70%, it actually sets the positive relationship in the conversation. And whatever you want to communicate it's very well supported by the tone of your speech as well as the words. But actually, the body language is actually quite important. When I say body language, I'm not talking about how you look, or, I'm not talking about the physical. It's about how you place yourself, how you sit, how you get engaged. You are looking at the person, not looking at your phone and, looking at your screen. I think even when I was preparing for today's session, I thought, I should be talking in the screen. I should be looking in the mirror and talking to the people who are watching me. Because if I'm looking at two other screens and fidgeting with my phone, I don't think I'm demonstrating what I'm trying to say. So is that your similar experience, Tevita, in relation to, let's say, if you are standing in front, I'm sure as a general manager for student engagement, you've had many times where you stand and you're announcing, or you're making an announcement about introducing your guest, or you're chairing a meeting. Would you use all these clues that we're talking about?
Absolutely. I think the delivery is so important. It's not just about the words. It's absolutely about, you have to have the posture you talked about before. I mean, if no one likes to be listening to an announcer if they're hunched over, reading something in front of them, they want, clear, you want eye contact with the audience. You want to be able to understand that what you're saying can be concise, and that you actually have an excitement, or you respect the words that you're talking about. And I think that's about the genuineness about it. And so the way you're talking to a crowd is the way they receive it. So I guess you put in what you want back is probably really one of those things.
Yeah, I love the word that you said, excite. I mean, when you talk, if you're excited to talk and about it, you make the other person excited. But, if even at an interview, when you talk about your skills and your knowledge and your experience with excitement and how much you enjoy having done that job, it makes the other person feel, wow, this person is passionate. So I think the tone, I mean, I like talking about this tone, and I'm conscious about it myself, that, a tone is very, very important. The way you raise your voice, or the way you moderate your voice, and being conscious about it is very important. When you are talking to people who are quite distressed and people who are emotionally upset, try not to raise your voice and keep talking loudly, because, that creates more agitation. And it kind of comes even from child psychology, when the child is screaming and yelling. Sometimes I think most of people, try to scream on top of the child's voice. And what you notice is there's a competition of who's screaming more. But actually, I've kind of felt the practice is, the calmer you are when you're dealing with crisis, with the language, you're actually able to get the person to calm down. Similarly, I love the way, if you want to be excited and talking about an event, about your project, you're going to talk about and say, you know, I have great skills in organizational, and this is the event that I did, and you know, let me talk to you about the event, and you put that tone which is about excitement, fun. Oh my God, how much you had pride and value in the work that you've done. It actually excites the employer. It feels like, wow, I'm finding an employee who is actually going to be very excited about their work. They value their work. And also how you say it. I mean, you know, I think you gave a very good example right at the beginning. Words have so many puns, you know, the way you say, yeah, so how are you going today? And somebody says, yeah, I'm really well, with one way, yeah, I'm well. Okay. So I think these are just two sentences. I'm really well, and or I'm happy to, or hi, how are you feeling today? I'm really well, I'm happy. Yeah, I'm well, I'm happy. And I think we pick up the true feelings of how you're going. And the most important thing, facial expression. You know, I think we all have some quirkiness, and that's fine. And I think that's why the world is so beautiful, because it has people who have different facial expressions. Your eyes speak a lot, your smile speaks a lot, your grumpiness says a lot, your gestures speak a lot. But I think the voice can reveal your true feeling through the facial expression. I don't know, can you give us an example, Tevita? You know, and I think particularly, I'm sure we've related of how our bosses speak to us, that, you know, from the good morning tone, you know what the day is planned. I've always thought that whenever I've worked with bosses who come in and say, so good morning, Rachna, how are you today? I always think, wow, I'm going to have a happy day, because the person started with a happy tone. And somebody who walks past me and says, oh, good morning, how are you going? I kind of think, oh my God, what am I being prepared for? What about your examples at work, Tevita, or, you know, just with family or at an interview?
Yeah, no, it's extremely on the nose. I think, you know, it's incredible. So the same sentence in different tones will set the scene for the rest of your experience for that day or that week or that project or that meeting. And I think that's key. When, you know, when someone goes to you, morning, Tevita, how are you? It's like, hey, I'm really good, thank you. Thanks for asking. Whereas if someone goes, morning, Tevita, you're like, morning. It's almost, you tend to almost mimic the message back. And I think it's really important. I'm not saying that everyone should be chirpy all the time. I just think that it does set tones. And if you are purposely trying to have a good day or set a tone for the meeting or the people around you, you have to acknowledge that it's very powerful. It's very powerful in the way we interact with people. And so, I mean, there's been a couple of situations in interviews where I've been an interviewer and an interviewee, and I think the tone is, so, you know, you were saying before, and someone goes, you know, I did this project, we got, you know, we met our budgets, we got the outcomes, and if that excitement is, you go, wow, you just write that, really excited, really proud of the work they did. But this one said, yes, I did this project, we got all the outcomes we wanted, we were in budget. It's like, okay, it becomes almost, you know, it almost becomes a drone kind of attitude. I think that's why with communication, especially the prep. The prep is something that all of us are still learning how to be the great communicators, and I think it comes with more interactions and practice, and you know. But I think even with interviewing, you need to understand your history and your experience, and be able to convey it in a way that you want someone else to be there with you. And so that's really important. But yeah, equally, if you're not excited, or if you're reading it like a script out of a novel, without the characters, it tends to be someone tends to switch off and sort of doesn't really listen to what you're talking about. And that's the voice.
Thank you, Tevita. So I think the next one is exactly what you said, is we want to talk a little bit about, you know, how you communicate. Just being succinct and precise. So listen to the question, and if it is about, it's exactly what you follow when you write, when you speak to, is if somebody asks you a question, listen to the question. What is it that they want to hear, and so be clear and choose your words carefully to the audience. So, I mean, most of the students we're talking to are researchers, master's level. So you have to pitch your language based on your sector, based on the people whom you're targeting. And yes, we're not saying use simple words to a highly intellectual group of people where you're doing a presentation on your research findings, please ensure that you use the appropriate language. And exactly what Tevita said is, speak in a way that captures their attention. Try to give the little pauses. Try to bring in some lightness in what you're speaking. Keep checking with people. So are you understand what I'm trying to say, or do you need anything more for me to clarify what I'm saying? And every word that you say should count, and it should kind of reach the person's heart. And I've always seen that, as a CEO, I've had to have very difficult conversations in some workplaces about making changes, moving people on, sometimes, difficult conversations. And I think if you speak less, speak from your heart, be genuine, and have the honesty with which you intend to have that communication, you actually get through. And the person is less traumatized when they're hearing about an adverse conversation. And you should try and make sure, while you're speaking, that your mind is not wandering away. And I always pick this up when you interview people, that sometimes people start you try, and I always recommend to people who go for interview, try to keep your balance of energy across the interview, because sometimes I think you start off really well and start getting that fatigue by the end. And when they ask you, so talk to me about your communication, and you're quite flat at that time, because 1 hour of an interview is a long time. So it's like your race, your 400-meter sprint or something. Keep the energy for your every 100-meter. And I'm an athlete, so I kind of talk more about from the running perspective, but I'm sure it's perspective when you play a game. But I think keeping that communication has to be very, very powerful. And you really have to ensure that you're specific. So if you are asked a question about, let's say, can you talk to us a little bit about project management? And what are your skills, knowledge, and experience on project management? So it's very clear. It's about project management. It's about your skills, knowledge, and experience. So the key words to have listened to in the question is, what is your skills? What is your knowledge? And what's your experience? And it's all related to project management. And you only have 5 minutes to answer that. So being very clear that how is the best way I can communicate that? Is it by giving an opening statement saying, this is my level of project management and I've gained this through my work at the Graduate Student Association, and say, okay, I'll demonstrate my skills, knowledge, and experience by giving you an example. And maybe giving an example of how you manage lead, okay? And that way, what happens is you are able to demonstrate, you understand what the skills you bring. That means you may talk about your planning process, your task allocation, your time allocation, your resource allocation. You may even then talk about what kind of knowledge you brought in. You was the leader, you coordinated, you allocated, you kept a time chart along with it. And then your experience is how many of such kind events you have done. So for the person who is interviewing you, they also know you, apart from your textbook knowledge, you actually have an experience to provide. Similarly, when you are providing your thesis findings to your supervisor, you have a 1 hour conversation with him or her, and to say, what did you do in the last week? Being very specific. What have I done in the last week? What questions I'm going to ask you? So really being sure that you need to be specific, that your audience understands what you're trying to say, and to make sure people, whatever you're saying, whenever you give it with an example, sometimes people do say, oh, I speak to this person, and they always talk about their example or their experience. I mean, giving too many, going on to a historical thing about what you did in every year is not a good idea. It seems like a bit of a bragging. But I think being able to demonstrate a feeling, which is to highlight the question that you want to answer, is a very good example. So Tevita, would you like to share an example about how you have answered, let's say a staff member asks you a few questions about how they want to provide an example about a work that they have done. How do you like that to be presented to you?
I think for me, I'd like it to be concise. I'd like it to be clear. And I guess I've got to, I mean, as a listener and a person interacting, I've got to measure myself against how they're interacting with me. So I would definitely, if I have a staff member who is quite excitable and wants to tell me everything at once, I'll calm as a response. I'll calm down. Okay, great. So talk to me again about this. Talk to me again about this, and I will calm the situation so that both of us can get an understanding. I think it's really important to, whenever you're in a situation, to understand the room. And I mean, we talk about a lot of the one-to-ones and some interviews, but people's reactions in a big group of people are very different per individual. So for example, I mean, me alone, I tend to squint my eyes a lot when I'm listening or focusing. But with other people, when you see the squint and the wrinkles come up on the forehead, they almost look angry.
Okay.
So I know it's one of these things, understanding people's those nonverbals, and say, I'm actually listening versus I'm it can look like I don't really care, but I'm actually listening. And so I always make that clear. So I'm actually focused on you. So please bear with me and speak slowly. Or I mean, we talked about lead earlier. And watching. So lead, for those who don't know on the call, is our leadership program. We've been running it for 2 years, and this is our 3rd year. So systems to look out for that. And it's a leadership program for postgrads. And so even in that group, we have 50 students from all over the world, all over the disciplines, all different ages, and all have different family commitments and work commitments. And I think just understanding the group is the first part. So understanding like all the different versions of each other, and then putting that in ways where when you deliver a presentation or a workshop, you have to make sure that everybody understands you, not just the handful of people that are like me, or, so I think it's really important to, setting the goals for everyone, putting yourself in their shoes. So, as a postgraduate researcher with children, I need to be able to recognize that in what I'm talking about. Or a postgraduate who's gone straight from undergrad to postgrad, I have to be able to, when I'm talking about things, I don't really want to be talking about corporate life of 10 years, because those people don't understand that. I think it's really important to have a base level of conversation. I think that's, for me, really important in getting messages across, and almost having those little goals within the conversation to make sure most of the room, because you can't always promise that everyone's listening, that most of the room know what you're talking about, and also be able for them to come back to you with really good questions and clarifications.
I know, it reads really well to this slide, which is really matching your energy, ensuring that the language that if they refer to their colleagues as team members, follow the lead, the language that you use. And be careful about the jargon. Like if you are like, thank you for bringing it, lead. I use the word lead, and I assumed everybody would know about it. Just being careful that, you're using jargon that, don't use jargon that is not familiar to everyone. Of course, you may use jargon sometimes if you're with a group of people, and instead of using the same long thing, if everybody knows it, you may use that. And trying to break your concept from a big concept into small bits, like you said, what is relevant to these parents, and should I actually give them some lived examples of what they're going through, break it into small parts, and use logical thoughts, make your thoughts sequential, be able to say, okay, I am going to actually ensure that when I talk about my concepts, I am going to ensure that there is an ability to, think about it in a logical way so that they can understand that properly. So
I wanted to sort of just add to that part you talked about, jargon. I think it's also really important that if you are in a setting where they start using these acronyms that you've never heard before, to ask, say, sorry, could you please explain what the acronym is? Because I think there's this understanding that you're in a room of well-accomplished people, or even in an interview process. And if they use an acronym, you almost think like, I should probably know that. I'm not going to ask, because if I ask, I'm going to look silly. But it's actually not the case. It's actually bringing the conversation to a level where everybody understands. And if, you know, like, because some acronyms actually stand for different things. So it's just really important. Ask the question. Ask the question.
Yeah, and I think not feeling bad about it, you know, and that leads to the next question of effectively listening. I think talking is very important, but the biggest part of it is listening, because I think communication, we always keep saying, is, you know, two-way. We use this word very carefully. Oh yeah, please communicate to me. You know, it's a two-way conversation. But then if you keep on talking all the time, you're not giving other people the chance to talk. So it's about, you know, a simple thing that those who actually listen well communicate well. Because I think when you listen, you actually understand what the other person wants to hear, and then you communicate well. And I think the most important thing is that in interviews, I've noticed candidates who really, really excel in their answers, or I have excelled in my answers well when I've listened to the question. But when I'm so excited to sell myself and, you know, just get the job, that I sometimes actually don't listen to what other people are actually asking. And I think that's very, very important. That listening is very important. And there are different forms of listening. I mean, I categorize them, and we can talk about this a little bit, Tevita, into 2 or 3 parts. You know, there are times where you just want to ignore because it's not relevant. I don't think I'm sitting in this group. I've been told about what the BHP share markets are. I have no clue about shares. I don't understand it. Okay, I'm ignoring this content. Sometimes some people just want to get it out every morning to tell you everything what they ate for dinner and what shows they listened. And as a politeness, okay, I'm going to listen, that you're making me believe, and you have the body language and you nod your head. That's important. There are people who actually do selective listening. That means you go in and out, zoom in and out, and you have connecting sentences. That's also good in situations. But ignoring, pretending listening, and selective listening should be used very minimum. It should be not your daily lifestyle. And your lifestyle should be more about attentive listening and empathetic listening, so that you can actually pay attention and be able to understand what people are trying to say, make them feel your heart and your mind is listened to them, and you actually have the intent of actually doing something about it. So, Tevita, what's your experience about this particular level of listening?
It's interesting because, I mean, me myself, I'm a culprit of jumping in between all of those levels, and probably ignoring, pretending, and selective, usually with family members. But I think it's not. I mean, I think it's not saying it's bad to be in these levels. I think we talked about this earlier. Is that, I mean, ideally attentive and empathetic listening is a place to be as much as you can. I mean, I've had these situations where I'm in the middle of a big event for GSA, say orientation, and I've got someone come up to me who is a trusted partner or someone we know from the university, and they come and say, okay, hi Tevita, you know, I really want to talk to you about this and great. And I'm in the middle of managing risk and also monitoring the numbers and the sales and all this sort of stuff. And instead of me standing there nodding and thinking about everything else, and just nodding and doing my eyes and wow, and, you know, saying wow and great every 5 seconds, I will say, look, sounds fantastic. I'd love to have this chat with you just a bit later. I'm in the middle of something. Do you mind if I come back? Because I really want to listen to what you have to say. I just don't have the time right now. And I think that's been my go-to when the pressure's on. And I think you don't want to disrespect anyone, because you actually want to listen to them. So you want to give them the time when you have it. And I think it's important to make that clear when you're in those situations.
Yeah, I think letting people know that, you know, I have the time for you, but this is not the moment, is very understandable. So I recommend highly to use ignoring, pretending, and selecting very minimum. and being more attentive and empathetic. In relation to listening, one of the things that I always think is very valuable for us to consider is, the styles of responses that we provide. So in relation to the autobiographical response, I wouldn't spend too much of time, but I think it's the style of responding where people use very high-flown language, and just being very careful that sometimes when you are responding to certain things, you may just use the word like, we interpret this, or we advise you this, and we advise, probe, using official language sometimes in certain situations is quite important, because it is trying to get people to understand the seriousness of it. And that's probably very, very important. So I'm not going to spend too much of time on it, but I'm just aware that sometimes you may go into a meeting and you may be sitting with your solicitor or somebody who's from a department, and they're not going to use friendly language, and understand it's really their obligation to do so in that kind of a language. I think also it's about, remember that your communication have different perceptions. I always recognize that with people with power or authority, that if I'm going to a meeting and I have certain preconceived notions about that person, my listening and my communication is quite judged because I have certain perception. And trying to overcome that perception, like particularly when you go for a job and you kind of say, oh, I'm never going to get this, I've always applied for this, I'm never going to get this because I'm a graduate. I think that psychs you up, and that also is also the way you respond, or the way you develop an opinion about someone is very, very important. And I think it's absolutely realistic attitude that people have, that your experience is your perception, and it's very true that you can. And also being careful about the time, place, environment, about how you speak. Sometimes, as you said, Tevita, you have such little time and they're trying to take your time. Don't try to communicate things which are critical when a person doesn't have time. Or don't try to catch people on the corridor and say, oh, by the way, Rachna, I send you this little policy, and when are you going to respond to it? Maybe that's the time I'll never be able to pay attention to that request. And also understanding what's the environment, particularly if you are dealing with in a workplace or with your colleagues who has had a very traumatic experience at home, or they come back from an illness. You don't want to be spending the first 10 minutes talking about what you did exciting weekend, but actually giving that time to the person to kind of fall back into place, I think it's more emotional intelligence. Would you say that, Tevita, really about how you pick the time, the place, and the environment to respond?
Absolutely. And we talked about it earlier, is like put in what you get out. So if you've got to read the person, so if someone's upset, you're not going to be jovial and jumping up around and being excited. You've got to sort of calm it down. And that same goes with if it's a conflict or someone's agitated. It does make it worse if you don't read them properly. So yeah, although they just sort of say, hi, can I have a word? But if they say, well, they're upset, it means you've got to, be empathetic. And, okay, great. Calm and sit down and have. But yeah, great. Let's chat. What do you want to talk about? So I think those type of responses, it actually sets a scene for the rest of the conversation. It doesn't go well.
Fantastic. I think what I always say is, particularly, I like this thing, is that sometimes people think role play is only for entertainment and enjoyment. But when you're going for an interview, I love recording what the answers would be, and then listening to your different styles of how you've communicated. Get your friend or somebody to ask you questions, when you're practicing for an oral presentation or for your job interview. Sometimes recording and listening to yourself is such a good way to actually see whether you'd listen to yourself. That's the first key thing, oh my God, this is so boring, I'm not going to listen to it. So I think the different styles of communication is actually listening to yourself is very important. And that's why I say role play. And remember that assertive communication, I always think sometimes people can confuse being assertive to be rude and say, oh my God, she was so assertive, or he was so assertive and he's so rude. And I think the assertiveness is just being able to honestly express your opinion or your feeling or your attitude without, undue anxiety. I don't have to be pretentious. I just don't have to, you just have to be assertive. You don't have to infringe on other people's rights, but also ensuring, coming back to the first slide, your tone, your body language, your words. Those are key things when you're trying to be assertive. And really is, when we talk about assertiveness, the hand in hand that glows with assertiveness is the other part of it is when somebody is assertive, do you have difficulty saying no? I think that's a topic we want to spend some time on, isn't it, Tevita? Because the most difficult thing is when you're having a discussion point or when a group is talking about, all the exciting things. Oh, we've got to do this event and GSA should do this and that and everything else. And, you want to impress everyone and you have limited resources, limited time, limited staff, and no capacity. How are you going to be the odd one and you say no? How has that been for you, Tevita, to saying no? And what are the feelings you get when you say no and you're the odd person out?
Yeah, absolutely. So in the past, I mean, I'm still working on it, but I have had trouble saying no. So whether it's to my staff or a partner or a supplier, for me, it was almost about, oh, we can do it. Let's just do it. Come on, let's. And it wasn't really thinking about the knock-on effects, but it was always thinking about being a team player, making sure we can get this done, getting it together. And I think it's about gaining the wins or the runs on the board. And now, many years later, that would have it actually caused me more stress than I wanted, because although I would have wanted to say yes all the time because it made me feel good, it didn't make anybody else feel good that was affected by that decision. I think understanding the feelings behind it, so it's like, oh, disappointing people, it takes away those feelings of, disappointing people. And so, as I said before, if you can say, actually, at this stage, we can't do it because A, B, and C, or I don't think it's a good idea because the risks are A, B, and C, or we don't have the budget for it. So if we can do something that's different that might be able to use stay within our budget, let's look at it. But I think instead of saying yes all the time, it's about saying no with alternatives is part of my learnings. And no is a strong word, but no can be a positive word too, because it can save a lot of people time and resources and stress. And so I think that's been the biggest part of that.
And I think the important part is that, when you are assertive, you need to understand there are two aspects of it that, people may be assertive and you may say, oh my God, this person's so assertive because, the person's got issues of depression, or the person's really angry and so, is assertive to me and doesn't want to do something to me, or is frustrated, or they're just taking out their anger on me, or they're anxious, or they have a poor relationship. That's your interpretation of it. But actually, if you say that you being assertive can cause somebody to feel depressed and resent you and, get that person being frustrated at you, or it'll look as if you're getting angry with them or they're getting anxious at them. I think it's important to understand that communication is two-way. So your assertiveness with a good tone, with right words and good body language actually has mutual benefits for each of the parties involved. Because I think what it allows it to is to be able to understand is when people are assertive, to understand, in this situation, do I just have to be assertive to get my message through? Or should I not be assertive? Because if I'm assertive, I'm actually going to create more anxiousness for the other person. And is there a way that I can let them know I'm being assertive, because I need to be assertive because this job is important or this communication is important to me to say to you, to some people, or I have to say this message in an assertive way. So for example, if I am giving a message about behavior at a workplace, as a CEO or as a manager, I would expect that the person is being assertive, because if they're being assertive, it's actually being very clear to them that this assertiveness is because there is no gray area and this is what you expect them to do. So I think it's important to understand that that's where, when we talk about I statements, you know, it's like I statement gives listeners the information about what they're expected to do, and however making it less threatening. So I think an example would be, I would say to Tevita, Tevita, I think if you're presenting this communication workshop, I would do it this way. What do you think? Okay, that's one way of communicating. However, there are people who use the you statement, which is to say, Tevita, I think this is the, we are going to do this workshop, and I want you to do this, which is a different tone and a different assertiveness. So I think being conscious about the I statement and the you statement is very good, because the listener sometimes feels when you use, you did this, oh, this project did not turn out well because, you know, you did this, you did this, you did this. Instead, if you said, I think this didn't go very well because I think we did not plan properly. Or if you take an ability to take a joint responsibility, it's received well. But sometimes you may say, I want you not to do this again, because you're actually saying, this is my direction to you. And so I think people who are going to new jobs, understanding where the use of I and you statement is very important, because if you are a project manager and you want to kind of, you know, get into your team and don't keep going, say, I think we should be doing this. I think, you know, I think, instead of using where to use the I and the you statement is very, very important. So what are your thoughts on that? I have some statements which I thought was, you know, picky ones, which I thought would be good. Is it here a list of you statements? Imagine that your partner is saying this to you. You know, imagine you're in a relationship and you're constantly hearing, you're crazy, you make me angry, you know, you should be ashamed of yourself, you're right, you're wrong, you do it, you can do it better, you can't. How did you feel when you heard that, Tevita?
Well, I guess, again, it's feel awful, but I think what the part of the thing is that you put in what you get. You get what you put in, and so if you're saying these statements to someone, the first thing is either a block of communication, or agitation, grief, anxiety comes from the receiver, and I think that does not bode well for any relationship in terms of communication. And so I think that's why it's so important, you're talking about the I versus the you, is to be clear as there's two people involved, it's not just one. And so if you're saying you, you're pushing it, whereas if you're saying I, you're sort of taking it but sharing it. And I think that's the key part of all this. But yeah, as soon as you start using the you, yeah, all sorts of thoughts go through my mind.
Yeah, and I think it's you know, even in a relationship, it's good to define those statements and say how uncomfortable you are, even with your friend or your partner, or, you know, even as a child. I think as a parent, you know, constantly saying, you don't eat your vegetables, you don't do this, you don't do that. And, you know, somebody keeps blaming you. I call it as blaming. I think that doesn't really go very well. And, you know, emotional statements that actually make you happy is, you know, I feel happy. That sometimes those emotional statements are good to listen to. You know, I'm happy, I'm feeling angry, I don't want to do that. You know, I am feeling furious, I feel powerful, I feel insecure, I feel too afraid. So that's a different I, because you're actually giving out an emotion, and that's something, it's not actually trying to say, I am a person who can never make a mistake. I always do it right. I am, I'm a perfectionist. I have great time management skills. That's all fantastic. But I think when that becomes too much of an I, which is about demeaning somebody else, that I is not welcome. But if you start saying, to somebody, I'm feeling happy today, after you think, listening to that tone and think, oh yeah, there's been some shift in this person's life, or I'm really angry today, and trying to pause and give that person the time saying, are you comfortable to share with me what's making you angry, so that, I can understand if I can help you in some way, if you're comfortable. Or some people say, I feel furious about it. And I think it's about letting other people know how much it's upset you, and sometimes being paused and not saying anything is also helpful. But I think that's a very good thing, using that, the coming back to really the word, the tone, and the language is quite important. I think another thing is that sometimes people use very threatening language, and to be aware of those threatening examples, like, I'm angry, or you're making me really angry, I'm furious, you're infuriating, which are just two sentences. Like, you may listen to someone saying, I'm furious. But if you say, Tevita, you're infuriating, that is quite derogatory and it's not acceptable. Or I'm angry, or you're making me angry, which is sometimes you need to have that relationship when you're saying those statements. And I like putting these examples out there because words once said, they often can't be taken back very easily. And I think being cautious and picking your words really properly is really, really important. And I always feel that, there is a small formula, is like an I statement is to say, I feel furious when this happened, and I felt sad when this happened. Giving an example, an explanation of your feeling is always very helpful. It's really, really helpful to kind of stop and just say, I'm furious. I'm furious when I have to do that. That makes it much more easier. I don't know, Tevita, what are your examples that, where you've used powerful I and we statements?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the key to what you were saying is that the people receiving information don't take it personally. I think because when you're saying, look, it really upsets me when I miss a deadline, that I miss a deadline, or I can't find the right quote for a supplier, or man, I'd be happier if we could, if our supplier would return his email. So it's not, you've been chasing that supplier as my team member. You like, come on. And I'm not blaming you for the timeline that's had an issue. It's the supplier. And I think those conversations are really important, because if I say it differently, like, I hate it when we can't get things sorted on time. So, or I hate it when you haven't sorted the supplier. It's like, well, it's because it's not, it changes the whole dynamic.
Yeah.
And so I think
the choosing of the words are very important. And I like what you said, is telling staff that, I'm sorry, you didn't choose the supplier on time. So I'm a bit upset because the supplier did not get back to us on time, which is not putting the blame on that person, but actually saying, take some effort in finding the supplier on time. So as we have a couple of minutes, it's been a very enjoyable session to kind of discuss this with Tevita. But overall, I thought the summary of the first session is words are really important, okay? But your body language and tone is it's absolutely the essence of what you communicate. And I think we talked about being succinct, choosing the words correctly, using good body language, body contact, being able to choose your words so that you're listening and delivering the words to what people are asking you for, and being sensitive that there are power dynamics in organizations or in a relationship. So the use of, you may go into a session with certain perceptions, but try to overcome them by stopping your mind from wandering here and there and remaining focused on what you have to say, and also being careful of the use of your emotion and how you deliver that using an I and you statement. So that was the summary of the first session. And any comments from you, Tevita, before we talk about what's coming up this week as well as the next session?
Yeah, look, I really enjoyed that session. I think it doesn't matter how many years you've been doing this. It's always nice to recap and come back to it. I think the non-verbals is a huge part of human nature. And I think just understanding them. So, for example, I am awful at playing poker because I have these facial expressions that tell 1,000 words, and sometimes I get to be in trouble, or sometimes it just actually relieves the tension in a room because they know what I'm thinking. So I think it's really important to take notice of that, and also just start from basics. I mean, everyone, the respect part is like, if someone wants to tell you something important, treat it like it's important. And so I think, and make the time. If you can't do it right there, tell them, I really want to engage with you, but I don't have the time right now. Can we set up a time? I think that's more important than just nodding and just, the ignoring listening, or the pretending listening. So, I really enjoyed today's session.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And what's coming up this week, Tevita, for tomorrow and Wednesday and Thursday?
So GSA runs our webinars at 10 a.m. Monday to Thursday, and we try and link in our conversations around our strategic plan. So as I mentioned before, transition to work skills, academic excellence, so supporting academia here at University of Melbourne. We have supporting healthy and engaged communities, so the social aspect of our graduate cohort, and also representation, making sure that we're supporting you in what's important at university. And so this week is no different. So tomorrow's Wednesday, so we are doing our couple with parents session, so GradChat with tailored session to supporting our grad students who are parents or carers, and we have some experts in from the university talking about cyber security at home. So giving us some tips and some good practices about, because nowadays we are online mostly all the time, more than we are sometimes comfortable with. So I think it's important that because we're doing this from home and we have loved ones in the background or with us, or our information becomes more accessible, we need to be careful. And so we've got Darren tonight visit us tomorrow to talk through that. Thursday, we have Professor Steve Trumbull from the MDHS. He's the head of medical education department at MDHS, and he's going to talk about some of the stuff that they're doing to support their students through COVID-19 and some of the changes that have come through. So that'll be a great conversation. And also tomorrow's Wednesday, so we have a trivia on in the afternoon. So it's a music trivia. So if you're keen to sort of let your hair down a little bit and get involved, have some fun. So that's happening late afternoon. I think it's around 4 o'clock. And then we have Feel Good Fridays always, 3 p.m. We've got a local act, so sometimes solos or trios who are just going to jam session through Facebook for us. But essentially everything we're doing is going through our Facebook page, so please go to our Facebook page to see what's up. We also have a closed group that we set up called Connection in Isolation at GSA, and it's a little group. I mean, it's getting big at the moment, so almost over 300 students are just getting involved in chatting and discussing about things that are happening with them and strategies of coping from being at home so much. So that's the week ahead.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tevita and Andrew, for putting up this, the first session. And the next session, we're going to be talking really practical things about really planning, how to deliver. I think it's more about interviewing skills and ensuring that, we're giving you practical skills on how to respond to questions asked for you at an interview is going to be the main focus about it, as well as dealing with conflict and dealing with misunderstanding in a communication, so that's going to be the focus for next week. So thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you on the next Tuesday's career development workshop for May. And then before in June, most of our workshops will be focused on preparing for exams and what support you can get. Thank you so much.
Fantastic. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.